Tonight on Bridge City News, here are some of the top stories we've been following. A new initiative to help provide for needy families in Lethbridge. A 2-week ban on indoor group sports and fitness classes. And churches in our city are once again being forced to go back to 1/3 of their capacity.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News, Weekend Edition.
Thank you for joining us. An initiative has been launched to help provide for needy families in Lethbridge. The collaborative effort involves Amazing Grace Church, Connecting Our Communities Lethbridge, and the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. These groups want locals to know that help is available during these difficult times.
We are asking our community to come together to drop off donations, a brand new winter gear, whether that's a snowsuit, brand new gloves, toques, whatever you have. If they are in excellent used condition, we will take those as well. We want to dress at least 50 children who are struggling right now, and this is as the impacts of COVID within our community.
For me, it's a no-brainer. I can't put my blinders on. We see the need, it's COVID, it's hard times, and that's what Jesus would do, right? You know, he would go out and provide that for people. So why wouldn't the church, which is the body of Christ, do the same thing?
Some of the new restrictions from the province include a 2-week ban on indoor group sports and fitness classes. Those new measures are being felt in many cities across the province, including right here in Lethbridge.
We'll need to make adjustments accordingly to be able to give an open gym access to our members and provide them with the opportunity to maintain their fitness levels or increase them, obviously. And we know that the value of building a healthy immune system through fitness is not only good for the physical, but for the mental, especially during COVID and the times that we're enduring now. I can't imagine what the government's going through with. It must be a very difficult situation for them to have to make these decisions. And we just appreciate the opportunity to give some type of access to fitness and not just force close everybody.
To not be able to come here and do a workout, yet be able to go next door and spend the afternoon drinking at a pub, you know, in a social environment just doesn't make sense to me. And so I think a lot of people are, you know, seeing the inequity. We can all make the argument of what about my environment because it's so safe and that other one isn't, why is that allowed? And I think that's part of the problem right now is that we've got a situation where seemingly to the layperson and to the public, the exemptions and exceptions are being fairly haphazardly applied in ways that don't make sense to common people.
Churches in our city are once again being forced to go back to 1/3 of their capacity due to the Alberta government's new restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. As Micah Quinn explains, this will not only impact our faith community, but also other organizations such as dance studios, which have been forced to close completely for 2 weeks.
Starbound Dance Centre will be forced to shut its doors, and there is visible frustration coming from staff.
Because we do feel that fine arts and dance is really being targeted because we are in individual sports such as gymnastics and everything else, but we are being forced to lock down. We have so many protocols and stuff in comparison to schools and everything else, so we're really struggling that we've gone above and beyond to cap our class sizes and put in all this stuff, and that we are being forced to shut down, especially when we've had no cases in our dance studio or any dance studios in Lethbridge.
The studio owner of the Starbound Dance Centre, Sylvia Ng, says that they are trying to stay positive during this time.
And see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But for 2 weeks, we will be closed. We'll adhere to the guidelines. We'll be doing some more deep cleaning in here, like usual, but we were preparing for a winter show and everything, so everything's just been postponed.
The Ms. Church has stayed at 1/3 capacity for their congregation even before yesterday's announcement. The site pastor of the church, Joel Klemick, is preaching patience and a positive message.
And so in the meantime, while people are trying to cope, we're saying stay fixated on our hope. Our hope is not in a church service. It's not in our gathering sizes. We know Christmas is going to look different this year. We're getting ready for change. We don't know when things go back to normal, but we are confident that God's God's plan for us is not changing. This was mixed into it all along, and because of that, He's with us in it. He's going to walk us through it. This is the hope of Christmas, Emmanuel, God with us.
The restrictions will be lifted on November 27th. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
As people are spending more time at home, many are using quarantine as a time to add four-legged friends to their family. The Lethbridge Humane Society says, however, that pets must first be a good fit for your family, and they want to ensure that potential pet owners look at adoption as a serious commitment to a furry friend. The process for adoption might be a bit extensive in comparison to pre-COVID, but Ella White says adoptions have been steady.
Our adoptions have been going pretty good. Cats were always full. It never changes. We have over 100 cats in our care between here and our couple of foster homes that deal with baby kittens and that. Cats is never ending. Dogs is reasonably steady. Our numbers don't vary a whole bunch. Usually when something gets adopted, that space is filled within a couple of days to a week.
The shelter has had to make some tough choices, including canceling a major fundraising event.
For the 4 Saturdays following Remembrance Day, we typically host a Paws and Claws pet photos with Santa event. Sadly, this year, due to COVID and restrictions and all that and how we would have to have it, we have sadly made the decision that that event has to be canceled this year.
With Christmas soon approaching, White has advice for anyone looking to adopt or buy a pet on impulse as a present.
Pets are not presents. They are a long-term commitment. Dogs, anywhere from possibly 10 to 15 years, sometimes longer. Cats, you should be expecting a 15 to 20-year commitment if you're getting a young cat. These are not impulse buys. It's not, oh, look, it's cute while it's small. When it gets bigger, I don't want to deal with this. You really have to think about what you're getting and make sure you're committed to that long term.
A village in Zambia was known as one of the darkest communities because of witchcraft. But thanks to the outreach efforts of a missionary, there are no longer any witch doctors in the village.
Kapembwa was known as the darkest village along the lake shore. So people used to worship the spirit here. Spirit used to live behind this mountain. There were a lot of witch doctors in the village. If somebody is sick, they'll say, oh, let's take him to the witch doctor. Even if he has got malaria, they say, no, it's not malaria, he has been witched. So every time when people want to go fishing, they'll use magic. It was not very easy for me to start doing the work of God because they are too much dark in this village. So what I did, I said, no, I will not start doing anything. Let me just praying, asking God. For 3 months, I was not doing evangelism. After 3 months, that's when I started evangelism.
Unasiri mwishiwa Yesu kulingana na problem nayo na ndini shinganga. Nomba na sasa kwata problem ikalamba sana mu shinganga na fila kuyunda. Au chumi fyamba kukana. Na kula rabo ni kusuba fyakana kulukulea kule film kule film. Erina konkere aba mission baile na ile fika kuba suka kwe nanga mwakana kuti mwise mufike kunganda obumi bwandinga nafa ubaba pamubili namwe nishita mwaka kusuke shinga la mili na moyo kanshi wongina kushikwe washile panganda nali waiperesha nali washipa kufikira kwapene basile mpeperera nobunda pishiwandi wapitile mu mapepa shaunda tu kupita kwena kuchechi balensambilisha.
So through prayers, things have changed in Kapembwa. In Kapembwa, we have no witch doctors. Maybe one can come today and lift his banner. After 2 or 3 days, he will leave his place. The witch doctors that were living in the village, when we started praying, they started saying that no, their prayers are neutralizing the powers of the charms that we are using. So they started learning. As at now, we don't have a witch doctor.
Recapping one of our top news stories, a new initiative has been launched to help provide for needy families in Lethbridge. The collaborative effort involves Amazing Grace Church, Connecting Our Communities Lethbridge, and the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. These groups want locals to know that help is available during these difficult times. And a look at weekend weather. Today, mainly sunny with a high of +5 and a low -3 at night. Tomorrow, increasing cloudiness with a high of +3 and a low of -1 at night. After the break, catch BCN's interview with Mary Cardo, author of Help for the Laid Off and Hope for the Laid Off.
As many as 40 million people were out of work, downsized, laid off, or simply fired shortly after the economic shutdown this year due to COVID-19. Once thriving businesses, small and large, are now struggling to survive. Our next guest knows all too well what it feels like to be out of work. And if you find yourself in this unfortunate situation, she's here to tell you about some very important steps you need to take immediately after you lose a job. Mary Cardo's passion to reach out and uplift the millions of unemployed and underemployed people worldwide has increased since the publication of her devotional books, Help for the Laid Off and Hope for the Laid Off. Mary Cardo joins me now via Skype from her home in Houston, Texas. Mary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you. Now, Mary, you understand firsthand what it feels like to go from happily employed to finding yourself out of work, not once, but actually twice, right? So, Mary, can you maybe talk about what you experienced and share your story with our viewers?
Oh, for sure. I was a single mom during both layoffs. The first one was in the early 90s, lasted exactly 2 years. I learned so much about everything. I learned how to survive, not only survive, but thrive with joy as a single mom for 2 years. At the end of the first 2-year layoff, not only did I get a job, I got the career change of my dreams without a college degree, without training, without a foot in the door. Okay, that's crazy. A layoff can be and often is one of the best things that can happen to someone. It depends on their response. Okay, got my job, 8 years went by, having the time of my life, doing what I was born to do. Got laid off again, out of the clear blue sky. 3 weeks after my second layoff, I fell 16 feet out of a tree.
What?
I broke myself. What was I doing in the tree? I was trying to prune the tree myself. I fell 16 feet off the top rung of my ladder. A single mom has to do what a single mom has to do. When you don't have a job, you don't have money, you don't have a boyfriend, you do what you have to do. A week later, I'm in my home office. I'm in such pain. And I'm crying and I'm like, God, are you kidding me? Really? Why would you allow me to be laid off again? And why would I have this accident? I mean, what is the purpose? And boom, it was like, write a book about trusting me during a layoff. That's how Help for the Laid Off came to be written, quite frankly. You know, anything can happen during a layoff. It really depends on your response. So I learned a lot during the second layoff as well. So
that's amazing. Now, you've said that yourself that you didn't see it coming, and most people in that situation don't see it coming, right? But now that you've been through this a couple of times, do you have any advice for someone facing a job loss? I'm sure it's really a scary time for them.
The first thing I would recommend is allow yourself to feel all the gamut of emotions that you're feeling. It's very normal. You're going to feel anger, resentment, stress, worry, loss, anxiety, all of those things. The important thing is you cannot allow yourself to get stuck in any one of those emotions, especially self-pity. Your job is to find a job, okay? And you need to find someone reliable and trustworthy that you can talk to, maybe a friend, maybe a relative, maybe a pastor. Another thing I recommend, I don't know if y'all have these in Canada, but in the United States, you could Google, it's called Unemployment Ministry or Job Support Group.
Okay.
You can go there and, join those. The benefit of finding a job support group in your area is not only are you get aware of available jobs, but they offer free counseling. They offer resume editing. They offer coaching, interview skills, all for free by volunteers. Exercise is critical. It really releases your anxiety, things like that. I'm a writer, so putting things on paper, imagine writing whatever you're thinking or feeling and knowing that nobody else is going to see it. That is beyond therapeutic. One of the other things I learned to do, and it's very goofy, but I learned to barter for services. Now, listen, think about that. As a woman, you've got to look top notch when you go to a job interview. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I learned, I offered to babysit my hairdresser's infant son if she would cut and style my hair the morning of an interview. Now, if you're a mom, finding someone that you can trust with your baby, that's big. That's like huge. So that was a win-win situation. I did not have to financially pay $100 to get my hair done, but I got it done. And she was able to enjoy a night out with her husband. Another example, I have a friend whose elderly mother had knee surgery and had to go to physical therapy 3 times a week. And this was during my second layoff. So times were very shaky back then. She was scared to death of losing her job.
Right.
I had all the time in the world. I took her mother to physical therapy for 6 weeks, 3 times a week for 6 weeks. She paid my utilities for that amount of time.
Oh, wow.
So you can get your needs met, but you got to speak up. People are not mind readers.
Right. You got to be a little creative too, it sounds like.
For sure, for sure. You do what you have to do. And it was fun.
Oh, I'm sure. Now, you've put together some steps that every person should take immediately when they lose a job. And I know you've mentioned some that are very helpful, but what can somebody do immediately afterwards?
File for unemployment. That's the first obvious thing. Also, the more you get out of the house, wear a mask, but if you can go out and volunteer, make your story known. The more you are out in the world helping people, the more opportunities you have to share your story. You never know who knows who and who's going to bring the right tip to you. I also believe in praying and having a gratitude journal. I heard it said, what would it be like if you woke up tomorrow morning with only the people and things that you remember to be thankful for the night before? That had a profound effect on me. I mean, just think about it. So you may not have a job, but you have your health, you have family, you have friends, you've got a roof over your head. So another thing, this was really hard for me to learn, but swallow your pride and ask for help. Even you think your family and your friends, they want to help you, but it's very uncomfortable on the other side. I learned this after being laid off. It's very uncomfortable for them. So if you just say, listen, this is what I need. This is what I need. And just be very honest. And if they can help you, great. And if not, move on and find someone that can. One thing I mentioned during my first layoff, I had the career change in my dreams, but I had to work for it. Meanwhile, I looked for jobs that I had been doing for 20 years. I had a resume for that, but I also created a separate resume focusing on the skills that would highlight towards the kind of jobs I wanted. That way, I needed a job no matter what. I would take any job that came, and then continue to look for the job I really wanted. So, I mean, you do what you have to do. And I took a lot of jobs that were very underpaying, very quote beneath me. But you know what? When you're out of everything, your pride goes out the window, and that's a very good lesson. And I'm glad for that lesson.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to do what you got to do, like you said, and we're talking about looking for alternative sources of income, and sometimes you just have to do that, right?
I sold a lot of things. I had a lot of garage sales. As a single mom, I had to cash out my 401k, and I took like a 30% tax hit. That really hurt, but I obviously lived.
Yeah.
I had the support of friends and family and church, and so yeah.
Yeah. Now, Mary, do you have any tips for anyone needing to radically reduce their expenses and change their lifestyle, just kind of like change their whole household budget to adapt to their new reality?
Well, get rid of cable, get rid of your house line, and just have your cell phone. An alternative would be if you needed to have your phone for internet, then get rid of your cell phone. I don't know if surely you have libraries there. Get your entertainment and your books and your movies from the library for free. Why pay if you don't have to? Also, the libraries have computers. You can go and do your job search for free at the library. Scale down what you like to eat. Learn to cook very frugally. We had tuna macaroni casserole more times than I can count. If you need someone to take care of your pet while you're unemployed, let them adopt your pet temporarily. Shop at Goodwill, shop at used clothing stores. Get rid of the cable TV, get rid of the things that you do not need. Another thing that for any parents that are listening, my daughter was 9 to 11 during my first layoff. I really thought as a parent I would die. I thought I was the worst mother in the world because I couldn't get her school photos. I couldn't get her the band. It hurt me as a parent.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you, my daughter, she'll tell you today, she's a 38-year-old military wife, mom of 2. She did not know that she was suffering back then. She said, Mom, I don't think that I never felt neglected. I never felt like I was doing without. And she learned how to create a budget, how to stick to a budget. She learned she's not who she is. She's not who she is based on what she looks, what kind of car she drives, what she's wearing. She learned the value of a dollar. She learned the difference between need and want. What kind of good parent doesn't want their kids to learn those hard life lessons? Well, they're not going to learn them on Easy Street.
Right.
They're just not. And so she's grateful that she went through those hard times, and you come out a better, stronger, more compassionate person.
And it probably brought you two closer because you spent so much more time together, which in a kid's eyes, that's all they really want from their parent, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And during my second layoff, she was, don't make me do the math. I know she was 19 at one point. She actually worked and helped pay some of my bills without being asked. So
wow.
What kind of a kid does that?
Yeah, exactly. Now,
and she learned that through, you learn through those hard times of adversity. You just do.
Mary, what sort of feedback have you received from people who have read your 3 books?
Thank you for asking that. I actually have developed a lot of friendships since the first book was published. It's very rewarding when people contact me via email or Skype, phone, Zoom, whatever. They'll say, Mary, I want you to know I found a job. I started a business. I was doing this, but I thought of you. And it's like, I took your advice. The thing is, just because you've been doing A all of your life, I know you need a job, and if that's the next job, go for it. But you don't have to always be doing that.
Mhm.
You can go for what you want. Be bold, be courageous. What do you have to lose? President Trump says, what do you have to lose? I mean, it's just true. What would have happened if I had not gone for my dream? I wouldn't have had it. If you don't ask, the answer will for sure be no.
Well, that's true. There you go. Lots of fantastic advice in all of your books, including like how to land a job interview and all kinds of stuff. I wish we had all day to talk about this, but it looks like we're running out of time, Mary. But appreciate having you on our show. Mary Cardo, author of Hope for the Laid Off, Help for the Laid Off, and Prayers for the Laid Off. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Many Christians in the U.S. got actively involved to influence the presidential election to get a government elected that would uphold biblical principles. However, today's guest suggests that unless something changes in the way young people view the world, future elections might not produce a very godly government. We're joined by Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries based out of Colorado and author of Unanswered Questions, available at summit.org. Jeff Myers, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be with you.
All right. So, Dr. Myers, can you first of all just tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry, maybe your background?
You bet. Summit Ministries is a training program for young adults that equips them, a rising generation, to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. That's the heart of what we do. So we are wanting to train leaders for our nation who think biblically. The program has been in existence for 58 years. I've had the privilege to be the president for 9 years. I attended as a student way back in the day when I was considering graduating high school and considering leaving the church. Came to a Summit Ministries 2-week-long training program. Founder David Noble. I said to him, I hope you have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions. I was so arrogant. And he said to me, at Summit, we aren't afraid of questions. And I realized I was in the community of people where I could really ask the tough questions about my faith and about the world and everything else. For the first time, I felt like I found a place as a Christian in our age.
Okay, so that's amazing. Now, you spend a lot of time mentoring youth and training up youth leaders, but you say that there's not much of a difference right now between the way young adults who are in the church think about the world compared to young adults who aren't in the church. So can you give us maybe some examples of this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I have the privilege to work with about 40,000 young people here. These are pretty intensive programs, so it's a lot of mentoring. A few years ago, I began that young adults in the church and young adults outside of the church were very little different. So, for instance, 69% of church-going young adults today say they believe there are no absolute truths, that they are the ones who decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong. Then another thing began to emerge when socialism began to really reemerge as a force in our nation. So many young adults were telling me, oh yeah, I think it's a great idea. I really love it. And we did some studies on this and found that young adults are 5 times as likely to have a Marxist worldview as their older counterparts in church. So in both social areas and political and economic areas, they have decided, I am the one who decides what's right and wrong. I'm the one who decides what is true, right? So you take those things and put them together, and you end up in some really weird conversations. I would have a conversation with someone and I would say, well, that's not what socialism is. Look at all the failures. And they say, but I'm the one who decides what is true for me. And so I know what I want socialism to be. Therefore, that's what it is.
Interesting. So you're saying that socialism is becoming kind of more of a view of the young people. So far left socialism used to be frowned upon by the average American. So what's changed and why? Is it just kind of that viewpoint of the younger generation, do you think?
I think it is. The younger generation didn't have the experience that I had growing up. Now, if you go back in American history to the 1920s and 1930s, socialism was very popular. Even far left radical socialism was very popular. Fascism became popular in the United States of America. Adolf Hitler had his admirers here, even people who were working in our, the presidential administration, because they thought that guy knows how to get things done, right? So what happened after World War II is the rise of international communism. And in China and in the Soviet Union and in other places, there was wholesale slaughter of people to the point where one scholar said possibly up to 360 million people have been killed at the hands of their own government in the 20th century. 360 million people. It's wholesale slaughter in the 20th century. I saw that, right? So I remember being in high school and seeing videos of parades of military equipment and realizing the Soviet Union has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 15 times over. None of the young adults I'm working with have ever had that experience. As far as they know, socialism is just what, respectable countries in Scandinavia do. And so it's really no problem at all. We should have more of that here. They don't see the tie-in between the Marxist ideology and the socialist mindset.
Interesting. So is there any way that, do you think that almost the definition of socialism could change just based on the new world viewpoint of it? Is that a possibility?
Well, keep in mind, you've got an entire generation of young people who think that whatever they want to have happen is what is true. So they don't believe that Bernie Sanders is a person who does whatever he does. He's whatever they want him to, based on how they feel about themselves. So they don't. So I think the problem with the socialist worldview is that it's based on Marxism, which is based on materialism. Only the material world exists. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no God, no Jesus, no Holy Spirit, nothing outside of the material world. It's the physical world. You have trees, then you have wealth. You have mines, then you have wealth. And if there's only so much to go around and one person has more, that means they stole it. So it's not wrong to take it back from them because they stole it in the first place. What the young adults I'm working with today have completely missed is that wealth grows through good ideas, through innovation, through inspiration. So a lot of what we do at Summit Ministries is not just trying to say, hey, you believe this about socialism, that's bad. We say, here is what a mindset based on scripture could lead us to. Great ideas, innovation, inspiration, opportunities to overcome problems, not just by redistributing wealth, but by changing everything in the way we operate based on a biblical worldview. We try to give them that vision.
Where are today's youth getting these ideas from?
Mostly social media, and I know this because this last summer we did our programs virtually and we did a lot of polls. So I have polls from hundreds and hundreds of students, and I asked them, where do you think most people get their ideas? And about 65 or so percent say people get their ideas from social media. 1% get their ideas from church. 1%. So next to social media, it's friends. Next to friends, it's family or the news, something like that. But the church has almost no influence on these young adults, and these are mostly Christian young adults we're talking about.
And are they not learning the proper history in school?
I don't think I guarantee you they're not getting a proper history in school because I have reviewed all of the textbooks. And it's woefully inadequate in explaining anything from the standpoint of reality, not necessarily from a biblical view, but just what is real? How do we know? I mean, how could somebody look at a country like the Soviet Union and say, oh, I guess Marxism's really not that bad? How could they look at China or Venezuela even and say, oh, it's not really that bad? I mean, you have to have decided ahead of time that you're going to be a deceiver when you write that textbook in order to come up with the kinds of things that people have come up with.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned before that statistics show that 69% of evangelical youth who attend church don't believe in absolute truth, right? And you agree that so these young people are believing now that if their beliefs offend someone, then their beliefs might be wrong, right? So why do you think that absolute truth matters?
I think absolute truth matters in the world of ideas in the same way that gravity matters in the world of physics. You have to take it into account. I just love seeing the picture of that water tower grill. I want to go there and eat sometime. But if I decided I'm going to stand up on that thing and I'm going to jump off, I'm going to just jump off of the edge. The law of gravity says that I will go down, not up. Even if I feel like I want to go up, I'm going to go down, not up. You don't break the law of gravity. You just prove the law of gravity, right? In the same way, the idea of a moral absolute truth is that truth does exist. Justice is a real thing. It's not just something that is a concept that I can have if I can make myself more powerful. That love is a real thing, that the kingdom of God exists, that spiritual realities are just as real as physical realities. That's at the heart of a biblical worldview. It's also at the heart of a generally philosophical worldview. I did a doctorate in philosophy. That was my academic training. And philosophers all get this, but very few other people do. So absolutely recognize that there is truth and you are not it, is at the heart of living a good life.
Okay. And you were saying that apparently only 19% of church-going, born-again Christians have that biblical worldview. So how would you define a biblical worldview?
Well, a biblical worldview is a pattern of ideas that starts with God exists. Because God exists, we can know what is real. Because we can know what is real, we can know what is right and what is wrong. Because we can know what is right and what is wrong, we can know how to form a flourishing society. We can know how to be mentally healthy, so forth. And it applies to every area of life. It starts with Jesus Christ. That Jesus is at the center of it all, and everything else, as John Stott said, is circumference. When you start with that Jesus is at the heart of it, Jesus was the creator of the world, you actually, even though you're starting off with things that people say, that's just so crazy, you're talking about miracles and all of that. But if you start off with that, you end up with a view of the world that is more reasonable, rational, intelligent, and true than if you take a worldview based on, say, secular or materialist assumptions. That's how I define it.
And then what about unbiblical views? Can those be turned around?
I think unbiblical views can be turned around if we recognize what they are. So, for instance, a worldview that's very influential in my country and in yours is the worldview of secularism. Secularism essentially says, look, there may be a God, probably not. People who believe in him are crazy, but they have the freedom to do it. But even if God does exist, he's not relevant to anything else that is important. It's not relevant to how we live our lives, not relevant to our culture, programs we produce on television, governments that we have at the local, provincial, federal level, or whatever else. God is not relevant. So a lot of believers embrace that worldview implicitly, say, oh, sure, well, yeah, I believe in God, and I have an experience with him every Sunday morning, but that doesn't affect anything else. That mindset has got to shift. We realize that God is not just something that we add on to our lives, that if what he says in the Bible is true, then it becomes the basis for everything else.
Now, you'd mentioned that culture is influencing our youth today. So what advice do you have for parents?
My main advice for parents is you want to be sure you're helping your children get a training in the worldview. You should assume that they have questions that they have not found good answers to about their faith. How do we know there really is a God? How do we know that the world is created rather than it just evolved through random chance processes? How do we know that Jesus really did rise from the dead? How could there be a good God if there is evil in the world? Every young adult I know is asking those kinds of questions. And if they aren't getting answers in church, then they're going to assume it's because the church doesn't have the answers. You've got to train them in a biblical worldview. We can help. Summit Ministries, summit.org. There are a lot of other organizations too that will help you. Apologetics and worldview training are a big part of. There's a lot of programming on the internet. There are a lot of ways that you can get that training for your kids, but I believe it's absolutely vital today.
Yeah. So what would you say to parents who have teens who are simply not interested in what the parents have to say, not interested in listening to them, what they're trying to teach them?
Oh, but that doesn't actually happen. Just sorry. Yeah. So what do you do if your children are not interested? I think you have the conversation with them that you would have if you were trying to get them to, say, stop using drugs, and say, in your current situation, you may not see everything that you need to see for the future of your life. I want to be walking alongside of you, helping you. I need you to trust me that this is something we need to do. So many parents will tell me, I sent my child to a Summit Ministries program for 2 weeks. They did not want to go. 2 or 3 days later, they called and said, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Thank you." At this point, you have to learn to be a parent, because your children have friends, and their friends may not be leading them in the right direction. Just having you as their friend is not enough. You've got to be the one to say, look, I can see farther down the road because I've been there through my own mistakes and through things that I did right. And I need to give you this direction.
Right. So it's very important for parents to know who their children are befriending and perhaps even intervene, right? If to discourage them from befriending them. So how do you do that? Especially for the older kids.
I think for the older kids, I continued to try to find new friend groups for my kids. So I'd get them involved in different activities. We'd get together with those families, part of it. If I noticed there was a child at school that my son was a friend with, then I would get to know that family and have them over and do different things. So it's all part of building the community. When friends go bad, it's because our children are developing friendships that are outside of any kind of a positive community. We have to be the ones to create that. You can't just assume that the person who lives down the block, because it's a nice little neighborhood, also has the same values that you have. You've got to get to know them and have those discussions and talk. Essentially, you're discipling other people, even as you're discipling those who influence your children.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Jeff Myers, it looks like we are running out of time here, but Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries based out of Colorado and author of Unquestioned Answers. You can find that at summit.org, along with many other resources, as you were saying, right? Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely happy to do it.
We are still being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers are continuing their search for a vaccine. In the meantime, there are treatments being used on those infected and continued hopes that our own immune systems can do the job to fight off the novel coronavirus. Dr. Francisco Delgado is a chair for a very special stewardship committee at one of the major hospitals in Indianapolis, Indiana, and that's where he teaches about internal medicine. Dr. Delgado, thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you for the invitation to be with you.
Not a problem. Now, when you first heard of COVID-19, what were your thoughts and what did you think about the symptoms and the virus as a whole?
We had a little bit of background from the first coronavirus that was called SARS, S-A-R-S #1, which I think you were closer to because you had some cases up all the way to Toronto. So we knew a little bit what to expect. We just didn't have a lot of information in the very beginning to know how much of a problem this was going to be, and it turns out it was a lot more problematic than we were expecting. Yes.
Has the virus mutated in any way as it's gone from person to person?
The viruses change their genetic material. So when you talk about mutations, there are always mutations within viruses. Those mutations are usually very small. Really, at this point, not clinically significant, meaning that those mutations do not, we cannot talk about different viruses per se. There's just small changes in the genetic material of the virus. So in a way, yes, it is mutating, but the mutations are not significant at this point.
Is there one vaccine that can really wipe out the entire virus?
We hope so, but it's not here yet.
Now, what's currently happening in the pursuit to create a vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, what's happening? There's a lot of vaccines that are being evaluated. Last I heard, there's about 44 or something different candidates. Only a few of them have reached what we call clinical studies. That means being given to people to see if it works. They are, we still are trying to figure out if those vaccines are safe and if they can be produced in enough quantities to reach essentially all of the world.
So, Dr. Delgado, what treatments are they currently using on patients that have extreme COVID-19 cases?
So the severe coronavirus cases are the ones that essentially land in the hospital that require significant amounts of oxygen for people to survive. And unfortunately, we don't have that many treatments. So far, we know that steroids can help some people. There has been an antiviral that was given what we call an emergency use authorization. The latest articles that are coming out are not very optimistic because they don't seem to have the benefit that we were hoping that they had. So we really are very limited on the treatments that we have for coronavirus at this point in time. That's why we are trying to look for other alternatives that could help us treat the virus in a more effective way.
Now, in a recent article, you stated that researchers are making progress by mimicking the immune system's operation, highlighting the elegant and sophisticated design of the immune system. Can you explain?
Sure. The way that the body attacks virus or controls viruses is this way. The body will produce something called antibodies, which are proteins. And these proteins will bind to the virus and essentially render it inactive. That is the way that the body essentially protects us against viruses. One of the principles behind using what we call convalescent plasma, which is another possible treatment modality, is essentially that we collect the antibodies from a person who has recovered from the coronavirus. We isolate the portion of the blood that has those antibodies, and then we transfuse it to patients that are infected with the virus, hoping that there are enough antibodies that will bind the virus and render it inactive. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of good data also from this kind of approach. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to see if companies that have isolated those antibodies, which are called neutralizing antibodies, if we're able to find the right antibody and give it to a person that is sick, then those antibodies will bind to the virus and essentially render it inactive.
Can you offer up a better understanding of how bodies are designed to literally combat viruses using something called sentinel cells?
Yes, the immune system, I gotta tell you, it is extremely complicated. And the way that essentially this happens is once you are exposed to, let's say, a virus, a bacteria, there are cells that will recognize that something is not supposed to be there. Those cells will essentially attack that pathogen. They will break it down into multiple small pieces. They will essentially sort out which pieces of that pathogen can be useful or can be the Achilles heel of that pathogen. And then they present those portions, those pieces of the pathogen to other cells and tell them, listen, this is what you're going to be looking for, so mount a response against this kind of a pathogen, against this kind of structure, if you see it around the body.
So, Dr. Delgado, as much as we know about other viruses, what's the unique challenge when it comes to COVID-19 specifically? What sets it apart?
Yes, the challenge is, first of all, a time-wise challenge. The more we go through this pandemic, there is going to be a lot more deaths, number one. We will find some alternatives to combat this virus in the future, but this is really more of a race against time If you take, for example, another virus like the HIV virus, right now we have been able to produce a lot of medications that control the virus very well, but it has taken us more than 30 years to get to this point. Of course, the death toll from HIV is very high. So we're facing the same scenario with a virus that is actually killing people in a much faster way than HIV. So that's why the challenge is more a race against time at this point.
Now, when it comes to the virus, doctor, living on things like a piece of paper or maybe metal on a door handle on a car, or if you go to a clinic, how long does it actually live and how does it survive?
Yes, it depends on the surface that you're talking about. There are several studies that put out, there's anywhere between 1 and 8 hours, depends on what kind of a surface you are considering. Despite the fact that the virus lives for several hours on surfaces, it doesn't seem to be the main route of transmission. So you could be touching stuff that is contaminated, but unless you put that stuff directly in your nose, in your mouth, in your eyes, then really the chances for you getting infected are going to be rather low.
So, I mean, if we're social distancing or physically distancing 2 meters apart, about 6 feet, plus having the masks on, chances are we're not going to catch the COVID-19 virus.
That is correct. That is correct. Distancing and protection of eyes, mouth, and nose is very important to prevent transmission.
So, doctor, in your opinion, will the virus ever be completely eradicated, or will we have to learn with it, like you mentioned earlier, like with SARS or maybe with the flu?
That's a very good question, and it is very difficult to tell at this point in time. The first SARS coronavirus 1, for unknown reasons, essentially disappeared from the face of the earth. So we have not been able to, to find that same virus right now. Will that happen with this coronavirus? It doesn't sound plausible because it's already all over the place. A possibility is that this virus will be living in a small percentage of the population in areas of the world, throughout history, really. We don't know yet, but that is a very interesting question. We don't have an answer yet.
As a medical doctor that has had so much experience working with viruses, what motivated you to conclude your article by saying that our bodies speak loudly about the exquisite design of our immune system and that we are fearfully and wonderfully made?
Monoclonal antibodies, what we're trying to use to fight this virus, is actually mimicking something that the body does, which is essentially manufacturing antibodies that are going to inactivate the virus. The interesting part is that our body takes only days to manufacture these antibodies, whereas it's taken us months to even get something that we can try on people safely. And this effort has involved multiple researchers throughout the world. So multiple minds essentially trying to mimic what the body does. It essentially speaks of a fascinating amount of design of the immune system.
As a Christian working in the field of infectious diseases, how has that really impacted your faith? And how are you able to harmonize your faith with science?
Yes. This is a question that has a lot of aspects to it. Part of the issue with infectious diseases, you could say, is part of the issue on why people get sick and what is the issue with suffering? How come they're suffering? So we could go on that side, but essentially my role, my calling has been to help those people that are suffering. I like the idea of infectious diseases, and the reason I became an infectious disease specialist is because it has a very tangible impact. We can really cure a lot of diseases with our antibiotics and essentially transform people's lives. At one point, infectious diseases was the main killer of humans, and with all the advances in modern medicine, we've been able to turn that around. Yes, there's still a lot of ground to cover, but we really have made a big impact on infectious diseases.
Dr. Delgado, let me ask you something. Some people are saying all of the wildfires we're experiencing up and down the U.S. West Coast, you know, some of the flooding taking place and different viruses, including the novel coronavirus, are all signs of the end times. What are your thoughts?
I probably wouldn't go that far. I think that there are many of these things that we're seeing that have happened throughout time. And again, it would be very difficult to conclude that this is the end of everything. I do not think that we would have the full picture to conclude that.
Dr. Francisco Delgado, thanks a lot for your efforts in the medical community, and thanks again for joining me on Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for the invitation again.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks so much for watching.